Max, welcome back to Captain's Table. And I think I'm going to start off by saying that it's very nice to be with you having this discussion. And maybe you could tell everyone a little bit about what does Carbonbase actually do?
Thank you so much, Will. And thank you to Captain's Table for organizing and giving us this chance to talk. Carbonbase is a climate change technology company. We are trying to help large corporates and individuals understand their personal carbon emissions and then create strategies to reduce, measure, and finally reach carbon neutrality. We think that we're living through this critical period where everyone wants to understand how to best participate in the decarbonization process. And we're kind of giving people the tools, the know-how, and the services to help them get there.
Fantastic. I mean, we met last year at the Captain's Table, and maybe you could just talk about a little bit about what was the experience like for you and what the aftermath of the Captain's Table was like in terms of the impact on your operations and business going forward.
At first, I just want to say that being a member and participating in the Captain's Table process was a transformative activity for our company. You know, we sort of understood that maritime shipping and the entire shipping industry as a whole was a very critical part of the global supply chain, and one that was going to face increasing scrutiny actually under the UNFCCC climate change conference push for decarbonization. However, as outsiders to the industry, we didn't have many opportunities to fully understand what the needs were of ship owners, charters, and the entire ecosystem. Because of Captain's Table, we had a chance to interact deeply with Will and your team at Kwong. And also thank you to your visionary positioning actually to sponsor and create a sustainability focused sub-challenge on the entire competition that created this kind of matchmaking. And in that process, we really got a chance to know each other and also to help Kwong calculate all of the carbon emissions of the company, leading to Kwong becoming the first carbon neutral shipping company in Hong Kong. Since then,
well, thank you. No, I mean it was very fortuitous for us. I think we got a lot out of it as well, and I'm glad that it helped from you to develop your business. And I think we're a year on now, so nothing stands still in the technology world, and obviously the sustainability debate is constantly evolving. And I'm interested to hear from you how Carbonbase has grown and developed since last year when you came in with an idea of what your plans were, and what are you working on now, and what's changed since 1 year ago?
I would say one is we've seen increased customer growth. So we started working with other shipping companies, also started working with real estate companies. And most recently, we signed actually a giant power producing company as a client and helping them build the similar system. To us, sustainability is not an isolated phenomenon. It actually is a supply chain wide problem. And in order to actually fully understand and recognize the changes we need to make, the upgrades we need to make, we actually need to visualize and map out the whole supply chain. So one of the key ideas that we discussed that I think resonated a lot with you, Will, too, is that we need to create methodologies and technology that sort of efficiently track the process of which carbon starts at one end of the very ultimate upstream, all the way down to the individual things that people are buying in their daily shops and what that carbon footprint looks like. The other side that we've been thinking a lot about actually is the opportunity to use blockchain to kind of curate new carbon credit economy opportunities, specifically in the blue ocean and kind of maritime economy, because a lot of the carbon credits that are people generating today are based onshore, they're terrestrial carbon credits. And yet as a whole, the ocean actually is the largest carbon sink of our entire world. So being able to help understand and then incentivize, catalyze additional investments into the blue ocean economy is something we're thinking a lot about right now.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And I guess we've sort of brought ourselves up to date, and now we're going to look ahead as what you see the future holds. And of course, we're all having to revisit our ideas on what we thought our targets would be. And I think that's happening at a much bigger level with COP26 around the corner. I think that the goals are going to become much more ambitious. And I think what you say about shipping working on its own being, not an efficient way of doing things, but it has to integrate with the whole supply chain is something that resonates very, very strongly with us. So I'm interested, where do you see the question of sustainability in shipping developing? And precisely, I guess the way to look at answering that is, what are the opportunities for technology companies like Carbonbase within, within that?
Thank you. So one of the things we're really excited about is in interacting more with other shipping companies, we understand that as a whole, the industrial decarbonization process actually is very tricky. There are, for example, a lot of upfront capital investments that people need to make in the new technologies that would power ships, either LNG or methane, or I guess other hydrogen and other fuel sources. These alternative fuel sources require huge amounts of kind of committed capital upfront in order to ensure that not only is the ship able to function, and sort of deliver its goods, but also that there's up and downstream refueling stations, right? Ports need to sort of be renovated in order to satisfy this demand. So we sort of see there being a window in which these new technologies are starting to be piloted, and eventually, we'll have to kind of go wholesale into this process. What we hope to do is actually to quantify specifically the carbon savings around that transition, and then help the companies make a strong case to either request green financing from the banks, to maybe create carbon credits from their sort of innovative investments, and finally to actually visualize that impact to the end user, be it the commodities trading company, be it the sort of people who use the cargo ships to transport individual goods, and sort of bring that into something that the end consumer can pay for. Our key mandate, actually, the whole sort of vision driving this entire software build out, is that by using the software tools we have, we can actually kind of percolate the information through. Before, if the carbon calculation was purely done on Excel spreadsheets or in individual computers, there was no way to kind of update the people who are ultimately going to be responsible for the carbon in their shipping, to have them interact with and then decide to neutralize that individual shipment. So that's kind of the main thrust. And then the other side, I would say, is that the contents of the ships that are currently being transported, that part right now is kind of separate to the actual calculation of the ship emissions. But I think as we sort of see, from what's happening on the portfolio management, decarbonization aspect, not only are you responsible for, the carbon of your office building, but you're also responsible for the carbon of your investments. Similarly, I think that there's a growing conversation around, what is it that we're shipping and how do we actually look at the embodied carbon of those particular industries as well.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating because I see a lot of debates that are probably too shipping centric, that don't look up and down the supply chain enough. And the danger of those is, of course, there seems to be sometimes an assumption implicit that it's a one-for-one substitution when you're talking about new fuel sources. But of course, the concept of, a wind-powered oil tanker or a ammonia or hydrogen-powered coal carrier is slightly anomalous within the whole context of decarbonizing, everything. And when you actually take out the or you actually, to put it another way, is to factor in the activity that's happening in the other industries, such as steel making, in agriculture, and of course in energy consumption and energy production being the sort of key. Then I think it's so important that shipping is kind of present in all of those discussions that include parties from up and down the supply chain, and yet the discussions that just involve shipping, I think we need to remain wary of, precisely for that point I think you've just said. And I'll sort of expand this a bit to say, what are some of the problems and the solutions that you see emerging, particularly in shipping? Because I know you obviously do work up and down the supply chain, and is this one of the key problems, this sort of idea of an echo chamber? And what are some of the other problems, and more importantly, I think some of the solutions that you've got in your head?
Definitely. Well, I think that Kwong is an amazing partner to work with, and much appreciation to you, Will, for kind of helping us better understand the connections of the industry. Shipping is a very traditional industry, right? And the idea that there are substantial changes coming is both exciting and also perhaps uncomfortable feeling for a lot of people who have made this their business for the last 2 or 3 decades. What I think is important to consider for shipping as we sort of develop additional customers, we develop new tools, is actually to create business models and solutions that take the owner's burden of being carbon neutral from being directly placed on just the individual company and actually extend it along the value chain. This is, I think, the key thing that's going to actually make people understand this is not a thing that they just have to bear. They just have to increase their costs, without any kind of limit or expectation. They need to find a way to actually ripple through, right, each of the different parts that they're working with. One of the things that I think is interesting for us to think about is, can we actually create smaller quantities of the carbon savings, for example, by using a renewable ship or using an alternative fuel source, and then amortize that across all of the goods being shipped. So each person or each entity participating in the shipping process actually gets to take a portion of it from just the ship owner themselves. And then I think the other side is that the process of building ships itself requires a lot of investment in steel and machinery and raw energy. And that part, I think, if we sort of become more aware and smart about, can actually then incentivize the efficient decommissioning of the ships too. So creating a sort of life cycle analysis of that ship ownership. And finally, I would say that if we look at Europe in 2005 to now, a lot of the European companies have actually proactively taken a stance on carbon credit creation. This is something that a lot of the companies who are underneath the compliance regime have started to become smart about. They actually create their own supply of high quality carbon credits, and then they use that for themselves, and then they should use that for other companies as well. So I wonder if there could be opportunities for the shipping industry as a whole to sort of organize around that concept and say, we will collectively go and invest a portion of our revenue into natural capital exercises that can be compliant with the most stringent and rigorous additionality requirements in carbon credit side, and then have that come back to help service the industry. Because there's no way that shipping or most of the heavy industries in the world are going to naturally be carbon neutral themselves. We need to have this sort of balance, right, between the emission source, from useful human activity. It's not all human activity that emitted are bad. It's just like this is powering our economy. But on the other side, we need to practically create the carbon sinks, right, in order to actually balance these two and then reach carbon neutrality as a whole.
So yeah, fascinating, and I think that's an interesting concept about people who are investing in the head of the curve, if you want to put it like that, and deploying capital to obviously avoid what would be and otherwise would be a carbon emission. What is the process for generating carbon credits from the ship? And I'm sure that that's something that's happening. Have you done any of that sort of work? And I suppose more broadly, given what we've just discussed, how will you position Carbonbase itself going forward to try and get involved and play in a more active role within the transformation?
Definitely. So Carbonbase fundamentally is a technology and information technology company, right? The unique thing about carbon, I think, compared to many other asset classes, especially in the commodity sector, is that carbon also is a digital native commodity asset class. That a ton of carbon that has meaningful dollar value attached to it, right? 50 euros in Europe, 50 RMB in China. This unit exists mostly on a database somewhere, because you cannot hold or touch 1 ton of negative carbon emissions. It doesn't exist as a thing you can sort of move around. So we sort of believe that our training, our backbone, our sort of technology infrastructure is able to help quantify, capture, and then later on create, similar to like asset management, but carbon asset management sort of technology sector tools. And then using that, the companies can help better real-time visualize their carbon emissions, better participate in the global carbon markets, and then better participate in the creation of carbon, negative carbon emissions. We see this right now actually in real estate really fascinatingly. There are methodologies in place that if you're a real estate owner and you actually decarbonize a portion of your holdings, you can actually apply for legitimate carbon credits that are then transferable to another sector. So that is a existing infrastructure ecosystem. This does not exist in shipping right now. It has to exist in order for the ship owners to feel like there's enough financial support actually for their activity. And we hope to be a small part of that entire process.
The technology underpins that, and that's where you look to play the part. Now, I think we're really nearly out of time. I'll just ask one last question. Obviously, COP26 is in about 15, 16 days, a couple of weeks' time. Is there anything specifically you will look for that will come out of that? And what are your sort of hopes and fears maybe for COP26 in the next couple of weeks?
When I had a chance to attend COP25, I was staggered to understand that we have less than 7.5 years until we blow past our carbon emission budget. And this is now almost 2 years later, right? That timeline has shrunken considerably. We are at a very critical junction, but I think there are also exciting telltales of systematic change. One is that there's now active participation from the finance and business sector way more than the last 25 years of COP that we've seen. So I think that's a really meaningful difference. The second is that there are very aggressive kind of ambition raising activities from individual countries. And personally, I feel like from individual companies. So I really hope to look for a lot of pledges coming up in the next 14 days as companies and countries kind of gear up for it. Finally, I think the thing they really look at is Article 6. Article 6 of the COP, the Paris Agreement, actually discusses the role of international carbon markets. And the more robust and rigorous that market exists, the easier it is for businesses to plan ahead and actually sort of understand how they want to make their carbon-related investments. And finally, I would say that the opportunity for the shipping sector to look to new industry developments is itself a big opportunity, the digitalization of this traditional sector. And so I think that Captain's Table and the organizers behind it are doing a very fantastic job of actually creating a global competition, right, responsible for bringing all of us together and creating this discussion format.
Brilliant. Well, Max, I think we're out of time, and that's just a fantastic sort of short version of the conversation I'm sure we will probably end up having as well, which could go on for hours. And I've really enjoyed hearing about your progress over the last year, and wish you all the best for the future. And I think we'll leave it there and pass it back to the Captain's Table.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Will. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Max.